Let's step into a downtown Los Angeles showroom, glowing under 1,000 arrogant white lights. Cold marble floors stretched out beneath polished glass walls, reflecting the wealthy investors and loud journalists who paid a fortune just to be seen there. The air was thick with expensive perfume and brushed steel. Right in the center of the platform, beneath a single spotlight, sat the legendary Sterling Raven 1512, a silver-black luxury coupe that hadn't fired up in 18 long years. CEO Vivian Sterling stood beside it, wearing a sharp, deeply cut black dress, her honey-brown hair falling perfectly past her shoulders. She had craved the spotlight, rehearsing this for 3 months. This classic car was her father's absolute favorite before he passed. She built this whole flashy event around the promise that it would roar to life tonight, a desperate grab for respect from every investor doubting she could carry the family legacy. She confidently raised the microphone and gave the signal. A nervous young engineer turned the key. The first attempt gave nothing but a dry click. A second try sparked some dashboard lights, but they died just as fast as they appeared. By the third failed try, the silence grew so heavy the crystal chandeliers above actually seemed to hum with awkward embarrassment. Anxious whispers quickly rippled through the crowd. Clinton Avery, the 60-year-old billionaire whose $90 million check could either save or kill the brand, impatiently checked his luxury watch. And behind him, the 52-year-old board member who spent 2 years plotting Vivian's complete downfall, allowed himself a smug, thin smile. Now look over by the stage, half hidden behind a velvet rope. A tall mechanic in a worn denim shirt stood quietly with one hand resting gently on his little daughter's shoulder. Elias Walker certainly wasn't invited here as a guest. He was just a daily hire, paid a flat fee to haul cars from the loading dock to the spotlight. His heavy work boots were scuffed. His hands bore that permanent shadow of engine grease no amount of soap could ever scrub away. Beside him, 6-year-old Matilda clutched a tiny silver toy car to her chest like a lucky charm. When the third try failed, Elias slightly tilted his head. He muttered under his breath, speaking to himself, needing no audience to know what was wrong. That isn't a dead engine. It's locked out of sequence. Vivian overheard him. If she wasn't so focused on her ego, she might have asked why. But trapped under those arrogant lights, with rivals smirking and investors checking watches, she panicked and did the one thing her late father warned against. She grabbed her pride like a shield. Turning toward the quiet mechanic in denim, she took 2 steps off the grand platform and projected her voice clearly across the cold marble. "Start the engine," she smirked without a drop of warmth, "and I'll date you." The rich crowd laughed. It began with one startled chuckle by the bar, spreading outward like an expensive dropped glass shattering over a perfectly quiet floor. A reporter typed the joke, "But we know what's coming." Elias didn't answer. He didn't even flinch. He just reached down, covering his daughter's small ear, the exact way a dad shields his kid from a siren. But Matilda had already heard the mocking words. Her tiny fingers gripped a silver toy car until her knuckles turned bone white. Let's step back years before this gala in rural Oregon. Elias Walker spent his entire childhood inside his father's auto shop. He learned the hidden language of classic cars like kids learn nursery rhymes. By the time he turned 12 years old, he could spot a bad valve or a failing fuel pump just by listening. At 20, big restoration shops in Reno were begging for his help. He had no fancy degree. He had real raw talent. He had absolute patience for engines everyone else called dead. He met Sarah at a local county fair when he turned 23. A second-grade teacher, her laugh instantly softened the rough, grease-stained edges of his entire life. "Your daddy doesn't just fix cars with his hands," she would whisper to little Matilda. "He fixes them by listening." Matilda was just 4 when a wet highway took Sarah away on a random Tuesday, a late drive home after a normal parent-teacher conference. After that crash, Elias shut his garage down for almost 12 months. He kept working, but those lucrative offers from distant auto shops, the big restoration contracts, all demanded heavy travel, time away he just couldn't afford anymore. He rejected them all. He quietly chose the invisible, unglamorous life of a mobile mechanic instead, repairing old delivery trucks and busted farm generators for locals who paid in straight cash. The money was tight, but it meant he could always get Matilda from school. make her lunch every single morning, and sit by her bed every night, reading until her little eyes finally drifted shut. True dedication doesn't seek a spotlight. To him, her smile beat any shiny promotion. Matilda clung to a tiny silver toy car Sarah had bought 2 days before the crash. A die-cast model of a classic coupe, its metal wheels rubbed smooth from her constant nervous grip. Whenever she really missed her mom, she would roll it across the table and ask her dad the exact same question. "Do you think Mom will know if I finally see a real one someday? You and I know why he took this showroom job. The money barely covered his gas. But the gig mentioned legendary vintage automobiles on full display. He had simply thought, just for a quiet moment, that Matilda might finally see the legendary silver coupe she loved. He never wanted the spotlight or a microphone. Picture this, a smug CEO in a black dress mocking him before 200 wealthy guests, daring him to start a dead engine for a date. And Matilda, who was so thrilled earlier she practically inhaled her breakfast in 3 minutes flat, was now staring at the showroom floor, trying desperately not to let the tears fall. But Vivian Sterling was not always this brutally cold. Her father, Henry Sterling, was actually a quiet master of vintage performance restoration. He built the true Sterling Motors legacy, growing a humble Long Beach garage into a respected name at elite classic car shows. We know he died of a heart attack in his driveway right after Vivian turned 10. The whole company had been drifting ever since. When Vivian took over as chief executive at 26 years old, Sterling Heritage was bleeding cash. The market had already pivoted toward electric collectibles. William Crawford spent 2 years rallying older directors who thought Vivian was nothing but, well, as he loved saying behind closed doors, a sentimental heiress just playing with her father's tools. The Avery buyout was supposed to shut them all up. $90 million in capital, museum partnerships, and full access to the global collector circuit. But Clinton Avery had made his strict terms very clear during their first meeting 6 months ago. Sterling Heritage would get his funding only if they could prove publicly that they still had the pure skill to bring their legends back to life. Stories were completely useless to him. He wanted engine noise. So Vivian chose the Raven V12 Tart, her father's absolute favorite classic car, the exact vehicle that had not run since the morning he died. She hid a secret from the board. Despite 3 grueling months of expert effort, her top mechanics could not coax that Raven into starting. She kept telling herself that on the night of the gala, with enough pressure and the right specialist standing by, it would finally work out, but it completely failed. Let's watch this closely. When Elias spoke from the shadows, Vivian was already falling. She could hear William taking a quiet, satisfied breath nearby. She saw the sudden shift in Clinton's expression. That quick recalculation every seasoned investor makes before politely walking away from a dead deal. She looked right at Elias but completely missed the quiet, true talent standing there. She just saw a nobody, a silent witness who had just watched her fail miserably. And in that split second of sheer panic, she chose cruel mockery over honesty. William leaned in close so only she could hear his threat. "If that car does not run in 5 minutes," he muttered, "you better be ready to sign the sale papers tonight." You know how this goes. After her challenge, the room turned viciously cruel. In that polished way only wealthy crowds do. Some young guy near the press line laughed way too loud, desperate for approval. A woman dripping in pearls whispered to her friend, both flashing nasty grins. An engineer near the back muttered just loud enough for people to hear, "3 expert teams could not fix this. What is a mere part-timer going to do?" Carter Briggs, the head of floor security, was already advancing. He was 41, broad-shouldered, armed with that polite hostility you only learn working years in luxury showrooms. He stopped 2 feet from Elias. He glared down at little Matilda like she was a dirty smudge on glass. "Your shift is over," Carter snapped at him. "Take the kid outside before she ruins the rest of our VIP program." We've all heard comments like that. It landed like a hard slap. Little Matilda flinched. She had done absolutely nothing wrong. Picture this with me. A quiet girl holding a toy car, watching loud investors ignore her father's mastery. To the untrained eyes in that luxury showroom, true talent just did not fit their mold. Real skill rarely dresses the part. Security was hired to keep unpolished masters exactly like him far away from the shiny display cars. Elias calmly knelt down and adjusted his daughter's coat collar. He paid the security guard no mind. His voice was gentle, saving his energy for the only person who actually mattered. "It is all right, sweetheart, we can go." He knew exactly how these arrogant spaces operated. A real mechanic learns early that wealthy clients only see you as a temporary tool. You stay invisible until a machine fails and fade to black the second it purrs again. True experts endure that disrespect without losing their quiet pride. His little girl had not absorbed that bitter lesson, and Elias refused to rush it. Quietly holding her small hand, he turned toward the door. The rich crowd stepped aside, looking more awkward than truly respectful, shrinking back like they were watching a stray dog being shooed away from a party. The CEO, Vivian, suddenly felt a sharp sting of insecurity beneath all her loud confidence. She noticed the kid's face and the father's absolute discipline, because his quiet dignity highlighted everything empty about her own desperate need for public attention. She made the classic mistake of pushing someone who truly had nothing to prove. She doubled down hard. "If you really start that engine," she mocked, projecting a fake cheerfulness for the cameras, "I'll keep my word, dinner daddy-o a date." Right in front of everybody. The wealthy crowd erupted into laughter again. She thought she sounded clever, she just sounded cheap. Elias stopped walking. "Here's where it shifts. Watch with me," as he catches her eye over his shoulder. He wasn't mad, he showed that calm, quiet focus that only true masters ever possess. Total clarity. He realized this arrogant CEO wasn't just taking cheap shots at his worn clothes, without even realizing her massive mistake. She was teaching his little girl that honest mechanics were nothing but a total joke. He squeezed Matilda's hand to leave, but the young girl planted her feet firmly. She halted near the edge of the display stage and completely refused to budge. Her tiny knuckles turned white, gripping that classic toy car. Tears welled up in her eyes but never fell down. She looked up past the marble floor, staring right at that impossible luxury vehicle. Then she locked eyes with her dad, speaking with a gentle, hushed tone, using that cautious voice kids use when they think the moment might shatter into pieces. "Daddy, Mom said you could fix anything." Elias slowly closed his eyes to breathe. Nobody had spoken those words out loud to him in 2 long years. They had echoed through his head 1,000 times, always in his late wife's voice, during brutal nights when exhaustion hit hard and the money was almost gone, when tomorrow felt like nothing more than another greasy engine repair and packing a lunchbox. But hearing that pure belief from his daughter, under these flashy lights, changed everything entirely. He remembered Sarah whispering those words to their child right before the fatal crash. "Let's look at this ending together." He was fixing a scrapped Buick everyone else abandoned. Sarah used to stand in the doorway, balancing little Matilda on her hip. She always spoke with that exact same quiet confidence. Every single word carried absolute certainty, like she knew exactly how the world worked. "Between you and me, if Elias walked right out now, he wouldn't be wrong. Any sensible man would just leave. But his daughter would learn that when arrogant crowds mock you, hiding is the safest bet even when you hold the real truth and they don't." She would drag that toxic lesson into every school desk and job interview forever. A true father doesn't pass down fear, he turned right back around. The mockery from the wealthy investors hadn't completely died down. Up front, a handful of smug faces were still grinning. The CEO stood with arms tightly crossed, faking absolute control for the flashing press cameras. William Crawford was already pivoting toward Clinton Avery, desperate to do some quick damage control. Without a word, Elias slowly approached the main stage. Every step calculated, holding Matilda's small hand in his. He stopped 3 feet from Vivian. "I will try," he told her. He didn't shout. Real strength is quiet, and the entire showroom had fallen completely silent. "But not for your timeline. I'm doing this because my daughter still believes in me." Any remaining chuckles lingering in the back of the room instantly vanished without a trace. Vivian froze for several long seconds. Nobody had ever dared challenge the powerful CEO so bluntly. This quiet master, standing right before her, wasn't begging for any kind of approval. Honestly, he barely seemed to notice she was even there. He was just a dad anchored by his child's absolute trust, making every wealthy spectator in that showroom look completely insignificant. 3 minutes, the CEO finally responded. Her tone dropped, suddenly cautious of his quiet power. You get 3 minutes. Elias stepped onto the main stage and approached that legendary silver and black coupe. He didn't pry open the hood, he didn't demand any fancy engine diagnostic tools. He didn't even glance at their official engineering reports. Instead, he simply pressed his bare palm flat against the vintage front fender right over the headlight, bowing his head as though he were calmly listening to a sleeping animal softly breathe. Some arrogant rookie engineer standing near the back let out a quick, mocking laugh. Is he praying? But veteran engineer George Bennett wasn't laughing. George was 58 years old, the top chief engineer at Sterling Heritage, and the absolute last remaining staff mechanic who had actually worked directly alongside Henry Sterling inside that legendary original Long Beach auto shop. He watched the humble single father touch the classic car, and he recognized that deeply focused stance right away. That was the undeniable stance of a true master who poured lifetimes into old motors. This wasn't flashy theater, this was true expert diagnosis. Try the ignition once more, Elias simply requested. But pause the key at the halfway mark right before you finally crank it. The rookie engineer glanced at Vivian. She simply nodded. Watch closely now. He turned the key, paused, and cranked. This time around, right inside that tiny pause before the crank, a beautiful, subtle hum awakened from deep underneath the classic dashboard. The hum lived barely a second before abruptly dying out. Elias calmly opened his eyes. Who replaced the ignition switch but left the original key barrel in place? The expert engineering team froze. Finally, George Bennett spoke up. That barrel belonged to Henry Sterling. We kept it for authenticity. The switch behind it was upgraded last year for reliability. Elias nodded slowly. That is the real problem. You are trying to start a classic car using modern logic. The vintage engine does not recognize the sequence. Vivian frowned at him. Meaning what? You and I know this is his moment. He turned to her, no longer the hired help, but a quiet master who knew exactly what he saw. The motor is not dead, the fuel system is completely fine. The ignition is not broken either. This vehicle is locking itself out. There is an older protective circuit built into this. A design that cuts fuel flow if the start sequence is not followed in perfect order. That is why the secondary pump runs for 1 second and then just shuts down. It is not a mechanical failure, it is a refusal. A senior technician on the showroom platform, embarrassed in front of everyone, aggressively pushed back. We have tested every single electrical line in this car. Elias kept his calm voice. You tested what a modern diagnostic computer can see. But there are custom things her father built into this classic before computers were ever bolted to dashboards. Mentioning her father landed much harder than he actually intended. Vivian stared at him. She finally saw past the dirty uniform, realizing his steady gaze was not the look of a struggling part-timer. He knelt down by the pedals, running his bare hand along the underside of the vintage dashboard very slowly. Just like an expert doctor taking a patient's pulse. There is a hidden kill switch somewhere along here, he whispered, mostly to himself. And if I am right, nobody in this entire room has ever found it. Elias pulled a tiny flashlight from his pocket, angling the bright beam deep underneath the dash. He did not yank anything loose. He gently traced the wiring harness with 2 fingers, studying the thick pattern of dust. The tiny uneven scrapes on the metal lip, the faint discoloration along one painted seam, where decades ago a master mechanic perfectly matched a custom panel to the factory color. George Bennett stepped closer, suddenly feeling his throat tighten in awe. Let's think about this together. He recalled a secret ignored for nearly 20 years. In his later years, Henry Sterling had grown deeply distrustful of pure modern electronics. The legend was famous for hiding custom mechanical, anti-theft security devices of his own design inside his personal vehicles. He always loved saying that a car with a true soul ought to have a secret. Vivian heard George take a sharp breath. She was confused until the fading memory of her own father's voice suddenly echoed in her mind. She was 7 years old, balancing on a half-restored coupe, when Henry dropped his heavy wrench and told her those exact same words. A car with a soul ought to have a secret. We know better now, but back then she thought it was just a fairy tale. Elias stopped his fingers on a small rectangular hidden panel beneath the steering column, perfectly painted to match the dash. It was tucked away so well the flashlight barely caught it. Hidden right under a thin sliding cover sat a tiny mechanical lever, locked solid by 18 years of grit and hardened oil. "There," he murmured quietly. Then he calmly explained what this legendary Raven V12 engine truly needed. A simple turn of the key would never work. This machine demanded a strict sequence. Ignition halfway turned to wake the secondary pump. The clutch pedal pushed firmly to the floor. That hidden lever pulled gently to pop open the secondary fuel valve. A brief wait for the pressure to build. Only after all that could the engine finally start. The fancy restoration crew had crammed in modern parts until that hidden switch jammed halfway open. Their expensive computer tests always read false. They got errors, simply because the vehicle worked exactly as Henry Sterling built it. It refused to wake up for loud people who never learned how to ask properly. Vivian stepped off the stage, walking right up to the open driver door. She dropped the proud chief executive act, no more barking out orders. Instead, she moved the way a child does when she gets near something her dad used to work on. "How did you know my father built it like that?" she whispered. Elias kept his head down. "Because guys who love classic cars never hide a switch where it makes sense. They hide it where only a person who actually listens will find it." Vivian stood perfectly still. "You and I know he was right about the car." She realized with a heavy and painful honesty it was true about her dad. And it was definitely true of this quiet mechanic right in front of her. The very same guy she mocked publicly just 10 minutes ago. Elias calmly reached for the lever. But before his hand touched it, a loud voice snapped across the room. "Step away from the dashboard." William Crawford marched quickly over to them. His face held that icy calm of an executive realizing the next 30 seconds could save or ruin his company. He ignored the gifted mechanic entirely. He only stared at Vivian. "You cannot let some random contractor tear apart a $2 million display model right in front of the investors. Whatever happens next is entirely on you." He turned back to Clinton Avery, shifting his tone to sound like the perfect host. "Mr. Avery, I am so sorry for this little mess tonight. We will end the show right now and talk business in a private room." It was a slick corporate move designed to kill the awkward event, the embarrassment, and end Vivian's run as chief executive all in one breath. Vivian just stared at Clinton. The wealthy backer stayed silent, but his face changed into something cold and calculating. He was not judging the classic car anymore. He was testing her. She turned her eyes back to the Raven. True masters never force things. Elias slowly pulled his hand away, completely silent. He heard William's warning and totally understood. Rising up, he calmly wiped his hands on an old shop rag pulled from his back pocket. "You have the right to stop me," Elias murmured, holding Vivian's gaze without any anger. "But if you stop now, this car stays silent. Not because it cannot run, but because nobody has ever been patient enough to listen." You and I can almost hear her father's voice echoing. Old machines do not shout out their faults. You have to be patient enough to hear them. She stared at the marble floor. Little Matilda stood completely motionless near the edge of the stage. Her tiny hands gripped her silver toy car so tightly. She watched her dad with that pure absolute faith Vivian used to feel deep inside her own chest. 20 years ago, inside a Long Beach shop, smelling of brake fluid and orange peels. This is not just about a car, Vivian realized, struck by a sudden sharp clarity. This is about a child waiting for the world to admit her father is the master she knows he is. She squared her shoulders. "Let him finish," she ordered. William snapped his head around. "Vivian, let him finish, William." She did not shout, but her tone cut right through. "I take responsibility." Elias simply absorbed the silence, quietly. He backed away toward the open door, holding her gaze with complete calm. "If I'm right about this," he said, "you should be the one to start it." The entire room shifted. The technical staff turned. William opened his mouth, then shut it. "Your father built it," Elias told her. "If it is going to make a sound again, the very first person to hear it should be you." Let's watch together as Vivian slides into the Raven V12. The old leather cracked along every seam, sighed beneath her weight. The scent rising from that cabin was the smell of her childhood, of her father's calloused hands and a garage floor she had not seen since being a girl. Her strict composure, the polished corporate armor worn through every board meeting for 2 years, just fell quietly away. Beneath those showroom lights, the chief executive of Sterling Motors Heritage simply ceased to exist. She was just a daughter sitting behind the wheel her father once proudly held, praying that something he built would still respond to her touch. Elias waited quietly by the open door. True professionals never crowd. He spoke gently, like a surgeon guiding a highly delicate procedure. Turn the key only halfway, do not crank it yet. Wait for the auxiliary pump. She slowly turned the key. The cabin offered one single low hum, quiet as a sleeping cat. Press the clutch all the way to the floor and hold it. She pressed down. Now reach under the dashboard. Do you feel the small lever? Her trembling fingertips finally found the cool brass tab where his steady hands just were. Pull it gently, do not force it. This old car hates being forced. She carefully pulled the lever out by maybe a quarter of an inch. A soft, almost ceremonial click echoed out. Several wealthy guests near the platform completely stopped breathing. Clinton Avery had silently stepped a bit closer. William Crawford stood frozen, his polite corporate mask finally beginning to crack open. And Carter Briggs, you and I saw him utterly silenced. Let's watch this together. He just stood there, eyes down. Little Matilda stood by George Bennett, watching that open driver's door. Her tiny face lifted, paying absolute unwavering attention. Elias just listened. 1 second, 2 seconds, then 3. Deep behind the firewall, fuel pressure built and finally steadied. That faint hum smoothed out into a steady, quiet tone. He gave one nod now. Vivian twisted the ignition key the rest of the way. For one short, agonizing moment, we heard just the dry, mechanical click of a starter hitting an exhausted engine. William almost smirked. Clinton's eyes narrowed just a tiny fraction. Time stretched out like a held breath. Then, starting low like a massive beast waking up to stand, the classic V12 caught. A deep, throaty rumble roared from the engine bay, building into a rich, steady idle. The exact kind of mechanical music no modern auto factory makes anymore. A pure tone that vintage car collectors fly across entire oceans just to hear. Even the luxury chandeliers above trembled faintly from the raw vibration. Even the cold marble seemed to stop and listen. After 18 long years of silence, the Sterling Raven V12 was alive. Vivian's hands, still gripping the steering wheel, actually began shaking. Her eyes, staring through the classic windshield, finally filled up. She never let those tears fall. She didn't need to. The showroom saw them. You and I know the truth. The grieving daughter, not the wealthy executive, just heard her father's car return. She slowly turned her head, looking at the quiet mechanic through the open door. Her face showed zero pride, absolutely no cheap triumph. It held something much older and simpler, pure astonishment, deep gratitude. And underneath all that, the heavy beginning of a feeling she could not even name yet. For those first several seconds after the vintage engine settled into its smooth idle, nobody in the entire showroom applauded. They didn't lack admiration, they simply lacked the breath. This was the car 3 whole engineering teams completely failed to start. The exact vehicle that almost cost Sterling Heritage a $90 million investment. That quiet machine was now humming perfectly under the lights. Brought back to life by a silent mechanic in scuffed boots they were mocking just 15 minutes ago. Finally, the slow applause actually began. It sparked in one corner, right near the press line, where a reporter writing a polite obituary for Sterling Heritage suddenly had a very different headline to file. That clapping spread outward in a slow wave across the polished marble. By the time it finally reached the back of the room, even the older, stubborn directors allied with William Crawford were clapping out of pure, stunned professional reflex. Clinton Avery simply turned to his assistant and spoke without any expression. "Re-prepare the contract. We are absolutely proceeding." William Crawford's arrogant face went the color of cooled wax. His entire 2-year campaign was completely over. Their entire scheme to force a sale fell apart in just one turn of a key. Wrecked by the same guy he called a useless contractor in a memo just weeks ago. Carter Briggs stepped backward without even thinking about it. He could not look at Elias. Staring at the floor, he felt a completely foreign emotion. He was actually deeply ashamed. George Bennett did not clap. He just stood there, arms resting at his sides, staring right at Elias with total focus. His face showed a quiet respect he had not given anyone since Henry Sterling passed away. But the most important moment in that room had absolutely nothing to do with applause. It belonged to a little girl in a navy coat who had waited by the stage and who now sprinted straight across the polished marble in 3 quick steps, throwing her arms tightly around her dad's waist. "I knew you could do it, Daddy," Matilda whispered. Her voice cracked with the tears of a brave kid who absolutely refused to cry in front of strangers. "I knew." Elias knelt down and pulled her close. He did not care about the flashing cameras at all. He ignored Vivian completely. He ignored Clinton Avery, the wealthy investor whose money could have changed his entire life. He only looked at his daughter. He rested his forehead against hers and just took one long, slow breath. "You and I know that breath. It is the deep relief of a tired spirit finally standing straight after years of bending." Vivian slowly stepped down from the classic car. She crossed the wooden platform until she was standing right in front of Elias. The small microphone pinned to her expensive dress was still completely active. Everyone in the room would hear her next words, but she left it on anyway. "I was wrong about you," she said. She made absolutely no excuses about stress. She didn't blame the corporate board, and she refused to hide behind a joke for the press. "I judged your dirty work clothes before I looked at the real man inside them. I am sorry." The crowd, who had just caught their breath to clap, went completely silent once again. But this was a very different kind of silence. It was the heavy silence that follows an honest sentence. Elias stood up, still holding Matilda tight. He didn't gloat or smirk. He gave a single gentle nod. "Thank you, Miss Sterling." That was it, within 20 minutes of that classic engine roaring. The entire event flipped from a total disaster into a massive victory. The wealthy investors stayed. Clinton Avery's lawyers sat in a back room, rewriting the funding contract with much better terms. William Crawford sneaked out through a service door. He would resign within 10 days. Vivian Sterling did not stick around for empty congratulations. She quietly slipped away from the reporters, told her assistant to handle the final closing speech, and vanished down the back hallway, walking away from the showroom toward the loading docks. She spotted Elias in the staff hallway, down on one knee, buttoning little Matilda's coat. He had turned down interviews and rejected a fat bonus envelope from the staff. He just wanted to get his little girl dressed and go home. You and I know true talent needs no audience, chandeliers, or microphone. Just an empty service hallway humming quietly. Under harsh lights, the faint roar of that V12 engine still echoed upstairs. Vivian paused just a few feet away. She had ditched her high heels, holding them casually in one hand. Stripped of her corporate armor, she finally looked like a human, not a brand. "You are going to leave," she said, "without letting me properly thank you." Elias calmly finished buttoning Matilda's coat before even looking up. "I did the job I came for." "No," Vivian quickly replied. "You did way more than that. You saved my automotive company. And you did it right after I humiliated you in front of 200 people." He didn't punish her. True mastery doesn't need to. He simply replied, "You are not the first person to judge my hands instead of my work." That quiet truth stung worse than any insult. It showed her that her arrogant showroom stunt wasn't even unique. It had been completely ordinary. You and I know guys like him. He had absorbed countless insults from flashy people without ever saying a word. "Then let me be the first to apologize the right way," Vivian offered. She offered him a permanent position. A senior consulting gig right there at Sterling Motors Heritage, leading the classic car restoration for their most legendary historic vehicles. Complete creative control, plus a massive salary that would let him park his tired service truck for good. Elias didn't jump at the offer. He just looked down at Matilda. She was watching closely with the guarded eyes of a kid who decided this lady in the black dress still had to earn her trust, regardless of any famous classic car. "My time belongs to my daughter," the mechanic said. "I don't accept jobs that force me to miss her school plays, or her parent-teacher conferences, or our dinners together." Vivian crouched down until she was eye level with Matilda. "Then we will build his schedule around your school day," she promised. She spoke right to the little girl, entirely respecting her. If your dad joins my company, the job will fit around your life, not the other way around. Matilda carefully evaluated her for a long moment, just like she had studied a stray dog last summer before finally deciding it was safe to pet. Then, with that brutal honesty only a 6-year-old has, she asked, "Are you really gonna date my dad?" The entire hallway went dead silent. A tiny, almost invisible smile tugged at Elias. Vivian, the fierce CEO who crushed hostile boardrooms for 2 years straight, was left completely and utterly speechless. A sudden blush crept up her neck that absolutely no public relations training could ever hide. Elias glanced at the powerful executive. For the first time tonight, he looked genuinely amused. "That promise was yours," he quietly reminded her, "not mine." Vivian stood up slowly. She locked eyes with him. "I am a chief executive," she replied. "I never break my promises." A quiet, unexpected sound finally escaped the single dad. You see, real talent doesn't need to boast. For the first time in months, he actually laughed. But he refused to soak up the sudden applause. Real talent doesn't pose like some fake movie star would. "Coffee," he said, "no cameras, no wealthy investors." "And absolutely nobody," he added, looking at his daughter's small, upturned face, at my little girl. Vivian simply nodded, agreed. The three of them walked away from the spotlight, heading toward the parking lot. Far behind them in the quiet showroom, the Sterling Raven 512 kept idling, steady, low, and patient. Exactly how a legendary engine waits when true mastery finally brings it to life. To Vivian, that beautiful rumble meant her family's heritage was returning. To Elias, it was silent proof that his daughter's deep belief in him had never been wrong for a second. For Matilda, who walked right between them, holding a toy in one hand and her dad's rough fingers in the other, it was the unforgettable night her fiercely quiet father made a whole room of arrogant people stand up and clap. Between the mechanic and the CEO, it wasn't love yet. It was something much better suited for a real beginning. It was respect, quietly and undeniably earned. And you and I know, it became the firm foundation for everything that came after.